Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am so happy to see so many faces, some new, some I know well. My name is Tina Moses, and I'm the president of the Charleston Interreligious Council. And I want to welcome you and thank you this evening for joining us for our 4th annual Interfaith Speaker Series. This is an 8-part series focused on African American religious diversity and dialogue. This is our 7th of our 8-part series, our 7th lecture. So I want to encourage you to go to our website if you missed any of the 6 previous lectures, because they were all very, very excellent. They're all on our website at cicouncil.org under events. And under that tag events, you'll see the series listed there, and all of the recordings follow, and you'll see them under each of the events. So I want to encourage you to go see those, because we've had a series of excellent speakers, and tonight is also as well. So we're just happy to see you all and welcome you this evening. I want to express my gratitude to Roper St. Francis Mission Department that made this series possible. And also to our partners at the International African American Museum. They've been excellent to work with, all of them, and we're just grateful for their partnership. As you may know, the CIC organizes many events throughout the year. I encourage you to go to our website and see about the programming that we do. If you want to be involved in any way, please do so. Follow us on Facebook. Sign on to our newsletter. We send emails and updates about what's going on pretty regularly. And we also welcome any feedback or advice, or if you'd like to participate in any way or give us ideas. We're also willing and open to anything that you think important. Our mission, as you may know, our objective is educating people and bringing about an awareness and understanding about the many faith traditions. So you can find more on our website at cicouncil.org. Thank you again for being with us here tonight. I just want to let you all, you are all being recorded. I want to encourage you all, and our speaker also encourages you all to leave your cameras on if you'd like, or if you feel comfortable. No problems if kids are running through anything or anything that so happens, but I just want to let you know that you're welcome. We'd love to see your faces if at all possible. And also you will be muted during this talk, but at the end, during our question and answer period, when you have a question, our moderator, Elijah Siegler, will unmute you so you can ask your question. But in order to do so, he'd like for you to go ahead and write your questions in the chat section. As you come up with questions, as you hear our speaker speak, please go ahead and just type up your questions to Elijah, and he will receive those questions, and then he'll call on you during our question and answer period. I think those are all the announcements. Again, thank you for being with us here tonight, and thank you for supporting our work. I will now pass you on to Elijah Siegler, who's going to introduce our speaker. Elijah is also serving as a moderator tonight. He is the Vice President of the Charleston Interreligious Council, and he is also the Chair of the Religious Studies Department at the College of Charleston. Elijah.
Thank you, Dina, and thank you to everyone who's here tonight, and thank you especially to our speaker, who's I'm going to have the privilege of introducing right now, and I'll be brief so he can speak for about 35 minutes or so, and then we should have a good 15 or 20 minutes afterwards for some lively questions and answers. So our speaker, Alonzo W. Nesmith Jr., is a native of Charleston. He's a graduate of Chikra Elementary and Chikra High School in North Charleston. He holds Bachelor's of Arts degrees from the Citadel, a Master's of Arts degree in Hospital and Healthcare Administration from University of Iowa. And for 38 years, he served as a hospital administrator at MUSC. He became a member of the Baha'i Faith in 1981 and served several years as a member of the local spiritual assemblies of the Baha'is in Charleston. He also served on the Baha'i task force that created the very first Baha'i radio station in North America, WLGI, Radio Baha'i 90.9, which I believe is based out of Hemingway, if I'm correct, although you can correct me. He's also been a member of the Baha'i National Committee that promoted one of the key tenets of the Baha'i Faith, the equality of men and women. With that, I'll throw it over to our speaker, Al. Thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elijah. And I want to thank the Charleston Interreligious Council for sponsoring this 4th annual James Sawyer Jr. Interfaith Speaker Series. And also I'd like to thank and want to express my sincere gratitude to the local spiritual assembly of the Baha'is of Charleston, South Carolina for granting me this opportunity to speak on the topic African Americans in the Baha'i Faith. What I will do tonight, I will try to give you a brief history of a religion that is very comprehensive and that is very new in the series of manifestations and religions, and try and share with you some of the practices that we as Baha'is, African Americans, and not African Americans do in the Baha'i faith, and also give you the example of an exemplary Baha'i in the person of Louis George Gregory and some of his work that he did on the promotion of race amity. So with that, I will delve into the speech. I'll give you a brief history on the Baha'i faith. I'll start with a quote from Abdu'l-Baha. The holy manifestations have been as the coming of springtime in the world. For each spring is the time for a new creation, Abdu'l-Baha. Baha'is believe in progressive revelation. This concept of progressive revelation speaks to the fact that throughout the ages, God has sent divine messengers known as manifestations of God. Among them, Abraham, Krishna, Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus Christ, Muhammad, and in more recent times, the Bab and Baha'u'llah, to cultivate humanity's intellectual and moral capacities. Following the coming of the manifestation of God, extraordinary progress occurs in the world, reaching the roots of human motivation. His teachings awaken in whole populations' capacities to contribute to the advancement of civilization to an extent never before possible. The Baha'i Faith began with the mission entrusted by God to two divine messengers, the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Today, the distinctive unity of the faith they founded stems from explicit instructions given by Baha'u'llah that have assured the continuity of guidance following his passing. This line of succession, referred to as the covenant, went from Baha'u'llah to his son, Abdu'l-Baha, then from Abdu'l-Baha to his grandson, Shoghi Effendi, and the Universal House of Justice, ordained by Baha'u'llah. Baha'is accept the divine authority of the Bab and Baha'u'llah and these appointed successors. Briefly, I'm going to share with you more than 200 years ago, two divine messengers were born into the world. The Bab was born 1819, October 20th, in Shiraz, Persia. The Bab is the herald of the Baha'i faith. In the middle of the 19th century, he announced that he was the bearer of a message destined to transform human spiritual life. His mission was to prepare the way for the coming of a second messenger from God greater than himself, who would usher in the age of peace and justice. Baha'u'llah, that messenger that the Bab spoke about, was born in Tehran, Iran, in 1817 on November the 12th, and ascended 1892. Baha'u'llah, whose name translates to mean the glory of God, is a promised one foretold by the Bab and all the divine messengers of the past. Baha'u'llah delivered a new revelation from God to humanity. Thousands of verses, letters, and books flowed from his pen. In his writings, he outlined a framework for the development of a global civilization which takes into account both the spiritual and the material dimensions of human life. For this, he endured 40 years of imprisonment, torture, and exile. Abdu'l-Baha, born in 1844, ascended in 1921. In his will, Baha'u'llah appointed his oldest son, Abdu'l-Baha, as the authorized interpreter of his teachings and the head of the faith. Throughout the East and the West, Abdu'l-Baha became known as an ambassador of peace, an exemplary human being, and the leading exponent of a new faith. Shoghi Effendi, 1897 to 1957, appointed guardian of the Baha'i Faith by Abdu'l-Baha, spent 36 years systematically nurturing the development, deepening, and understanding and strengthening the unity of the Baha'i community as it increasingly grew to reflect the diversity of the entire human race. Lastly, the Universal House of Justice, which was elected in 1963 for the first time. The development of the Baha'i Faith worldwide is today guided by the Universal House of Justice in Haifa, Israel. In his book of laws, Baha'u'llah instructed the Universal House of Justice to exert a positive influence on the welfare of humankind, to promote education, peace, and global prosperity, and safeguard human honor and the position of religion. The Baha'i Faith in America. The Baha'i Faith was first mentioned in America in the United States in 1893 at the World Parliament of Government Religion in Chicago. Soon after, early American converts began embracing this new religion. Thornton Chase in 1895 was the most prominent among the first American Baha'is. Also, the early adherents included Robert Turner, who was an American Baha'i and who was honored as the first African-American Baha'i. He became a Baha'i somewhere around July or August of 1898. Briefly, Robert Turner was a valet and a server that worked for the Hearst family, Phoebe Hearst and her husband. He actually learned about the Baha'i Faith in a meeting that he attended with Miss Hearst, and he became a Baha'i in July and August of 1898. Let's talk about the first Baha'i who is in South Carolina. Our records show, and according to the thesis of Louis Venter III, Alonzo Twine, a practicing lawyer in Charleston, South Carolina, at the time was the first individual living in South Carolina to identify himself as a Baha'i in 1910. Louis Gregory. Mr. Gregory, Louis Gregory is a native of South Carolina. And the reason why he's not considered the first Baha'i in South Carolina because he became a Baha'i in Washington, D.C. in 1910. Abdu'l-Baha had a very loving and a special interest in the Baha'is in America. That love and interest was so strong until he visited America in 1912. Abdu'l-Baha's particular attention to the development of believers in Baha'i and institutions in the United States and entrusted to the Baha'is of North America the task of carrying the teachings of Baha'u'llah to most of the rest of the world. Abdu'l-Baha visited America for 8 months in 1912. He arrived on the Cedric in New York City on April the 11th, 1912, and departed on December the 5th, 1912 for Europe. Abdu'l-Baha specifically visited Montreal, Canada, but in the United States, he visited some 40 cities to spread his father's Baha'u'llah's teachings on the three onenesses. Baha'is believe there's only one God. There's really only one religion with various chapters in that book of religion, and one human family. The oneness of mankind, the pivotal teaching of the Baha'i Faith. Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i Faith, has written in his book entitled The World Order of Baha'u'llah these defining words on the principles of the oneness of mankind. And I quote, "Let there be no mistake. The principle of the oneness of mankind, the pivot round which all the teachings of Baha'u'llah revolve, is no mere outburst of ignorant emotionalism or an expression of vague and pious hope. He said, it appeals not to the mere, it appears to be merely identified with the awakening of the spirit of brotherhood and goodwill among men, nor does it aim solely at the fostering of harmonious cooperation among individual peoples and nations. Its implications are deeper. It claims greater than any which the prophets of old were allowed to advance. Its message is applicable not only to the individual, but concerns itself primarily with the nature of those essential relationships that must bind all the nations and the states as members of one family. It does not constitute merely the enunciation of an ideal, but stands inseparably associated with an institution adequate to embody its truth, demonstrate its validity, and perpetuate its influence. It implies an organic change in the structure of present-day society, a change such as the world has not yet experienced. Shoghi Effendi, The World Order of Baha'u'llah. This change, as the world has not yet experienced, is revealed in the many writings of the Baha'i Faith and the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Making this change a reality on earth is the main work, the focus, and the labors of love that Baha'is of African American descent or any descent are engaged daily, hourly, and every minute of their lives. In other words, we Baha'is yearn to serve humanity by lovingly and patiently sharing the many teachings and laws of Baha'u'llah's revelation as a service to humanity. For in this dispensation, the highest spiritual station is servitude to God and mankind. How do we, American Baha'is, or any Baha'i, serve the cause of Baha'u'llah? Individually, we do that by accepting Baha'u'llah and his covenant, which includes Abdu'l-Baha, Shoghi Effendi, and the Universal House of Justice. We accept and adhere to Baha'u'llah's teachings and laws. One of those teachings is prayer. There are numerous prayers that are written in the Baha'i writings. We are encouraged to pray at dawn. And Baha'u'llah says, at the dawn of every day, he, a true seeker, should commune with God and with all his soul persevere in the quest of his beloved. That's from the Kitab-i-Yagan, the Book of Certitude, written by Baha'u'llah. At noon, Baha'is are asked to do obligatory prayers, and the prayer that I use to make it personal, because the talk shit can be personal, I use this prayer every day. It is to be recited 24 hours at noon. It says, I bear witness, O my God, that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee. I testify at this moment to my powerlessness and to thy might, to my poverty and to thy wealth. There is no other God but thee, the help in peril, the self-subsisting. And at evening tide, we're asked to also pray. We also, as Baha'is, are required every 19 days to attend a congregational meeting of all the Baha'is in a geographical location under the guise of a local spiritual assembly. That meeting is called a Baha'i feast. We're also asked to fast from sunrise to sunset in the last Baha'i month, the month of loftiness, Allah, from the age of maturity, spiritual maturity, age 15. We're also asked to observe the Baha'i holy days, which are 10. We are to deepen and read the Baha'i writings daily. We read the prayers that are written by Baha'u'llah, Shoghi Effendi, Abdu'l-Baha, and we also read the writings that are written by those three figures of the Baha'i faith. And we're asked to contribute regularly to the Baha'i Fund after all expenses are paid as relates to our other obligations. Finally, as a community, we're asked to serve on Baha'i elected or appointed institutions. And we are asked to participate in the execution and the unfoldment of Baha'i plans. Some examples of the ways that we do that: we hold devotionals, consider and are supporting children's classes, conducting and are supporting junior youth groups, performing home visits, conducting fireside engagement activities. The Baha'i writings are comprehensive in its guidance. An example of some of the admonitions contained in the Baha'i writings for all Baha'is are contained in the quote I will share with you now from Abdu'l-Baha. The quote says, "Act in accordance with the counsels of the Lord." That is, rise up in such wise and with such qualities as to endow the body of this world with a living soul, and to bring this young child, humanity, to the stage of adulthood. So far as ye are able, ignite a candle of love in every meeting, and with tenderness rejoice and cheer every heart. Can care for the stranger as for one of your own. Show to alien souls the same loving kindness you bestow upon your faithful friends. Should any come to blows with you, seek to be friends with him. Should any stab you to the heart, be ye a healing salve unto his source. Should any taunt and mock at you, meet him with love. Should any heap his blame upon you, praise ye him. Should he offer you a deadly poison, give him the choicest honey in exchange. And should he threaten your life, grant him a remedy that will heal him evermore. Should he be pain itself, be his medicine. Should he be thorns, be his roses and sweet herbs. Perchance such ways and words from you will make this darksome world turn bright at last, will make this dusty earth turn heavenly, this devilish prison place become a royal palace of the Lord, so that war and strife will pass and be no more, and love and trust will pitch their tents on the summits of the world. Such is the essence of God's admonitions. Such, in sum, are the teachings of the dispensation of Baha, Abdu'l-Baha. Right now, I will transverse and go into a personal example using the life of Louis G. Gregory, a native Charlestonian, an individual who acted in accordance to this quote of Abdu'l-Baha, was a unique and wonderful human being, Louis Gregory. The life of Louis Gregory is an example of exemplary service and adherence to the cause of Baha'u'llah and his revelation. This look at the amazing and awe-inspiring life of Louis Gregory will be through the eyes of his biographer, Gail Morrison, author of Louis G. Gregory and the Advancement of Racial Unity in America to Move the World. Louis Gregory strived daily to act in accordance with the writings I just shared. He did so remarkably well. African-American Baha'is and all Baha'is tried to embrace his examples of selfless devotion and obedience. Born Louis George, he later embraced lovingly his stepfather's, George Gregory's last name, as his own during his adolescence. George Gregory encouraged him to do so. Louis's life conveys how Baha'is put into action the writings of the revelation of Baha'u'llah and its effects. Let's chronicle some of the events that made Louis Gregory who he is and who he was. Louis's mother and grandmother had been slaves on the plantation of George Washington Dargan in Darlington, South Carolina. It's the Elijah plantation. Louis's mother, Mary Elizabeth, freed at 14, had managed to obtain a little education before marrying and giving birth to two sons, Theodore and Louis Gregory. Louis was born on, as I said earlier, June the 6th, 1874, in Charleston, South Carolina, to Mary Elizabeth and Ebenezer George. Lewis grew up in the last turbulent decades of the 19th century, experienced a full measure of its pain and its promise. Lewis remembered little of his early life, shadowed first by his father's illness, tuberculosis, and death, then by poverty and even hunger as his mother struggled to support her family. Perhaps the sustaining force in this period was Lewis's maternal grandmother, a formidable woman who, though virtually illiterate, schooled him in dignity, courage, and love of laughter. The sense of humor she nurtured in Lewis served to lighten many difficulties in the years ahead. It became a valuable asset in his race amity work. Lewis wrote, and I quote, "If the walls of caste are ever to be shattered," he wrote at the end of his life, "laughter will be no small power in such a change." Lewis's prospects were limited, nevertheless, until his mother remarried in 1881. During my early childhood, he wrote, "My mother married George Gregory, who became a real father to me, so that by his earnest wish I took his name, becoming Louis George Gregory." The close relationship between Lewis and his stepfather continued until Mr. Gregory died in 1929. In addition to the security, George Gregory provided the family with increased economic well-being and a heritage of freedom that his stepson regarded with pride. Having been freed from birth and educated to some degree, George Gregory helped his wife and children obtain advantages that society otherwise would have denied them. After the marriage, his wife gained, in Lewis's words, quote, "a taste of good literature and some knowledge of music." The Gregory family was precisely the sort, quote, "a more than ordinary disciplined and stable family, and one that was literate and well. One that sociologists claim tend to produce pioneer generation of Black scholars and professionals." George Gregory made sacrificial efforts to provide Lewis with the best education possible in Charleston, later assuring that he had trade by apprenticing him as a tailor and paying for his first year at college at Fisk. Thus, from his stepfather as well as his mother and grandmother, he learned the qualities necessary to overcome a Black man's humiliating lot on racism: self-respect, love of learning, assurance, dignity, resourcefulness, and a sense of humor. Lewis's childhood memories of the South, despite the problems, Lewis grew up with a deep love for the region. He remembered Charleston in his boyhood as a gracious old city where, quote, "courtesy seemed the primal virtue," end quote. And there was less friction between the races than appeared in many other cities. Lewis's early playmates included children of white Northern troops stationed in the South after the war, and in their company, he gained perhaps his first experience of interracial amity. Lewis attended private schools. He passed the test of public education, going on to attend private schools funded and supported by Northern church groups and philanthropists. In his own words, "a talented tenth of the Negro race," he considered himself, who might, through liberal education, become leaders of the masses. Louis Gregory, as most of you probably know, attended Avery Institute and graduated in 1891. He attended Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, and graduated in 1896. But after graduating from Fisk, he loved Charleston so much until he returned home in 1896 to be on our faculty at Avery, and he taught at Avery. In 1909, only 2,000 of the 9 million Blacks in the United States, 0.02%, had graduated from college or had a university degree. Only 700 Blacks enrolled in college in 1900. That was a 0.007% ratio. Lewis had legal aspirations once he graduated from Fisk. He really wanted to be a lawyer, but because there weren't any opportunities in the South, he had to leave the South, and he went to the school that provided that opportunity, Howard University, and he graduated with his law degree from Howard University in 1902. Right after that, he started a law practice with James A. Cobb in Washington, D.C., until he took a job at the U.S. Treasury Department in 1906. This is when Lewis Gregory encountered two colleagues that worked with him, a gentleman from the South who named happened to be Mr. Gibbs, Thomas H. Gibbs, who fought in the Civil War and was a friend and compatriot of Mr. Gregory. And there was a Northerner that was in that office. They would banter back and forth about the North and the South. And Mr. Gregory said the conversation would be so intense, he thought he would have to referee, but he loved them both because they both had their convictions. He respected them both. But both of them shared with him a need to go to a meeting that they had attended. And Mr. Gregory said he didn't have any actual interest in religion because he was searching. He was pretty much disappointed. So that wasn't going to happen. But the gentleman from the South, Thomas H. Gibbs, insisted. He told him, you must go to this meeting on the Baha'i Faith. He had been to it a few times. So in the evening, a really cold, dark, stormy night, late 1907, Lewis Gregory went to this meeting on the Baha'i Faith. Lua guest singer was the speaker, and Pauline Henning, a white Southerner, was among those present at the meeting, along with her husband, Joseph. She would become Mr. Gregory's friend and teacher. Mr. Gregory writes this. He says, the light they unfolded, he wrote, of his period of study with the Hennings was so wonderful that for about a year, we sat in dumb amazement, listening to their patient, loving talks, not knowing whether to advance or retreat, yet held by supernal power. 2 years later, Lewis Gregory identified himself as a confirmed believer in the faith of Baha'u'llah at the beginning of June 1909. Louis Venter, in the history of the Baha'i Faith, on page 23, stated that in the summer, Lewis Gregory became, in his own words, a confirmed believer. But during that time, Mr. Venter said that Lewis wrote a personal confession letter of faith to Abdu'l-Baha, the living head of the Baha'i Faith, sent it to the Holy Lands. In November of 1909, Abdu'l-Baha responded to Lewis Gregory's letter of personal confession. And here's what the letter said, and we refer those to as tablets. He said, Abdu'l-Baha said to Lewis Gregory, I quote, I hope that thou mayest become the means whereby the white and the colored people shall close their eyes to racial differences and behold the reality of humanity. That is the universal unity, which is the oneness of the kingdom of the human race. Rely as much as thou canst on the true one, and be thou reassured to the will of God, so that like unto a candle thou mayest be rekindled in the world of humanity, and like unto a star thou mayest shone the gleam from the horizon of reality and become the cause of guidance for both races. Lewis Gregory took that tablet and went straight into action. In 1909, that same year, at the age of 35, as prominent as Lewis Gregory was in the American nation as a speaker and a lecturer, as a lawyer, a practicing lawyer, at the age of 35, he turned his back on a secure position, an economic position as a lawyer, directing increasing degrees of attention to a new unpaid calling. For the rest of his long life, almost 42 years, almost 50 years, he devoted himself to Baha'i activities foremost, finally abandoning his profession altogether to become what he entitled a race amity worker. As he often referred to himself, surviving on bare subsistence, devoting himself to self-imposed demands of his work, constant travel, writing, and lecturing in the cause of race unity. Gail Morrison, the biographer of Louis Gregory, writes this about Louis Gregory at this time. She says, at the heart of the most challenging issue of the American Baha'i community, the problem of obliterating race prejudice, stands Louis George Gregory, a highly regarded teacher, writer, and lecturer throughout the first half of the century. First Black to serve on the national administrative body of the Baha'is of the United States of America. Louis Gregory, she says, is a major historical figure. Let's speak a little bit about his character. Shoghi Effendi, when speaking about Mr. Gregory, detailed the qualities. He says, ceaseless exertion, end quotes, sacrifice, end quotes, care and vigilance, end quotes, moral courage and fortitude, end quotes, tact and sympathy, end quotes, that the solution of the racial problem in America requires. When Shoghi Effendi spoke about those, he used terms that applied exactly to Louis Gregory's remarkable spirit and action. Abdu'l-Baha, pure gold, refers to Mr. Gregory. In 1920, Abdu'l-Baha, writing to a woman who had met Mr. Gregory in Texas, Abdu'l-Baha paid Mr. Gregory a remarkable tribute. Here's what he said about Mr. Gregory. That pure soul has a heart like unto transparent water. He is like unto pure gold. That is why he is acceptable in any market and is current in every country. Louis Gregory's bright spirit was never tarnished by attention or by praise. Self-importance had no place in his nature. He attributed the light that others perceived in him to the powerful force of unity. Those who work for brotherhood and peace, he truly believed, could illumine the world. Louis says he asserted at the first Amity Conference in Washington, D.C., these words: if we align ourselves with the forces of unity and love, God will give to us inward peace, which shall leave its bright traces in all the realms of existence. It will make us true men and women. Louis Gregory traveled throughout the South at Imnasia, speaking on the concept of race amity and race unity. In the fall of 1910, Louis set out on a tour of Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, and Georgia. He visited Richmond, Virginia, Enfield, North Carolina, Durham, North Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, Macon, Georgia. That's from Louis Venter's book, A History of the South of Baha'i Faith in South Carolina. His talks in Charleston, November the 8th, 1910. Louis Gregory featured speaker at the lecture and musical at the Carpenters Hall in Charleston, likely arranged by his stepfather. After that event, Louis responded and reported back that the whole city seemed interested. On January the 1st, 1917, Louis Gregory was invited as the keynote speaker to Charleston for the Emancipation Day celebration at Morris Street Baptist Church. Louis Gregory wrote, it was an opportunity to tell them of real freedom. All this work of amity, Mr. Gregory married in 1912. Louis Gregory and a white English Baha'i, Louisa, her friends refer to her as Louise, A.M. Matthews, was married through the encouragement of Abdu'l-Baha on September the 27th, 1912 in New York City. Louis did not stop traveling in 1916 when Abdu'l-Baha sent the directions that the Baha'i faith needed to be taught in the southern states and spare no efforts in spreading the religion. Louis Gregory and he actually identified 16 states to go to. Louis Gregory visited all 14 of those states in a 3-month period from October to December. And he spoke in South Carolina, including South Carolina. He spoke at churches, schools, and also colleges. He spoke to more than 15,000 people in that venture. The conviction that we belong to one human family is at the heart of the teachings and the tenets contained in the Baha'i writings. They inspire relentless, loving, patient, and immediate action as Louis Gregory undertook in his lifetime under the direction and guidance of Abdu'l-Baha. It is Louis Gregory's life that many African Americans and Baha'is aspire to emulate. Louis Gregory worshiped and served the revelation of Baha'u'llah so perfectly until at his sudden passing in Elliott, Maine, on July the 30th, 1951, Shoghi Effendi, the head of the Baha'i Faith, sent this cablegram to the Baha'i world on August the 6th, 1951. He said, and I quote, "Profoundly deplore grievous loss of dearly beloved, noble-minded, golden-hearted Louis Gregory, pride and example of Negro adherents of the faith. Keenly feel loss of one so loved, admired, and trusted by Abdu'l-Baha. Deserves the rank of first hand of the cause of his race. Rising Baha'i generations in Africa and African continent will glory in his memory and emulate his example. Advise hold memorial gatherings in temples in token recognition of his unique position, outstanding services." End of quote. Louis Gregory, via the writings of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, championed race amity as a foundation for African Americans and Baha'is and all Baha'is today to commence the construction of an eternal and divine edifice for the oneness of mankind by putting into action the writings of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. This is a glorious undertaking we Baha'is all embrace and welcome with confidence of victory. I will close with 2 quotes from the Baha'i writings. Abdu'l-Baha says, "There's perfect brotherhood underlining humanity, for all are servants of one God and belong to one family under the protection of divine providence." Baha'u'llah says, "So powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth." Thank you for this precious opportunity, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Virtual applause, jazz hands. Thank you for that thoughtful, inspiring talk. Also, feel free now to write questions in the chat here. I'm gonna begin with the Reverend Demet Jenkins, who's actually, by coincidence, on the board of the Charleston Interreligious Council and also works at the International African American Museum, and I believe has met Mr. Nesmith before. So Demet, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Nesmith, for that wonderful, wonderful educational presentation. I have a couple of questions, and then I'll have a comment after everyone else has had an opportunity to ask. My first question is, what was your faith tradition prior to Baha'i? And what was it about Baha'i that was different from your previous tradition? And then if somehow you can respond to what are the traditions or customs of the Baha'i faith at the time of death?
I grew up as an AME. I attended Trinity AME Church. My pastor at that time was Reverend Clifton Miller, Randolph Miller's father. Randolph Miller and I grew up in the church together. And I became a Baha'i because I had the strong suspicion, even as a kid, that the teachings of the oneness of humanity was actually centered in another religion, and that I would find it. When I went to college, I was met a young lady who became my wife, who was a Baha'i, and she taught me the faith. And after being married for a couple of years, I embraced the faith in 1981. And I embraced it on the premise of the great spiritual energy, the truth, the comprehensiveness of it, the promise and the plans for the realization of the planet uniting as one, and that all human beings are one, and that the writings of the hidden words of Baha'u'llah says, know not why we created you all from the same substance, so that none would exalt themselves over the other. And that pulled me in. It's a faith that is very rewarding, very enlightening, endless logic, agrees with science and religion. One of the tenets is science and religions are in harmony. That all the religions agree, they're just chapters in the same book of religion, and that the human family is one, and that the division that we exist in the world is not God's doing, it's our doing, and we need to unite. And that just made me fall in love. And I love Christ. I understood Christ even more once becoming a Baha'i, because Baha'u'llah in the Book of Certitude speaks about all the religions of the past and shares things that I never read in the Bible, about who Christ was, and why did Noah do certain things, and what did Moses do, and it's just a beautiful religion. And as a Baha'i, I was encouraged to visit with all the other religions because they're all one. I wasn't told not to go there. We're encouraged to love all of our co-religious brothers and sisters. And it's just wonderful for me. And I think your other question was, can you repeat it, please? The second half of your question?
What are your customs or traditions and beliefs at the time of death?
At the time of death, the body of the person we do not embalm, because the concept of the Baha'i Faith is that from dust we came from, and unto dust we shall return. And so we don't embalm the body. The body can be washed with rose water, all natural. And the body must be buried in a casket of crystal or natural wood, so that that whole process of returning to the elemental substance that we came from is not hindered. And at the time of death, we are asked not to remove the body more than 1 hour from the place of death, so that the soul and that whole process is uninterrupted. And we facilitate the return to the divine being from which we came from, which is God. The Baha'i writing says, unto God, from God we came, and unto him we shall return.
All right, thank you. The next person I'm going to invite to unmute themselves and ask a question is O'Neill Abercrombie. Hey, O'Neill.
Hi, Al. Thank you very much for that enlightening talk.
I have someone's calling me, but I can't kill the call. Oh. Now I can, yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering if you might be able to elaborate a reference in the Baha'i writings about people of African descent being referred to as the pupil of the eye.
Okay. Yeah. The pupil of the eye is a reference that, if I'm remembering correctly, and if the other Baha'is on here correct me, I think it was a reference that Baha'u'llah made to the people of African descent and with the darkest skin. He said that they were like the people of the eye because they are able to see the light that's in front of them and all that is associated with it. And that because they have that ability, they are have, I guess I would say, spiritual susceptibilities that that contributes to their spiritual well-being and the spiritual well-being of other members of the human family. That's what I recall. Could you add something else to that, O'Neill?
I think I might have sent a quote about the pupil of the eye. So I'll just share the quote.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm sorry, to click over, I can't be
I
on
know.
the camera at the same time. But it says the qualities and characteristics of the people of African descent. This is a quote by Abdul Baha. Thou art like unto the pupil of the eye, which is dark in color, yet it is the fount of light and the revealer of the contingent world.
Thank you. That's a beautiful quote. And if we still have about 5 or 6 minutes, so time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. And then some people want to just make some comments at the end too, but there's one question lined up from Krista Johnson. So Krista, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Oh gosh, I didn't know I was gonna have to come by. Thank you very much for your talk. I found it very interesting. I was just curious. I'm a professor at Howard University, and I've been doing research from my own perspective on Alain Locke. And I discovered, of course, that he was also a member of the Baha'i Faith.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to know, I imagine that he must have met or had some relationship or connection with Louis Gregory.
Yeah, I think in his biography, they were on stage together at an event, but I can't remember exactly what that was. I can research that, and I can actually send that to you if you give your email information to Elijah. I'll send it to Elijah, and he can send it to you. Yeah, Alain Locke and Louis Gregory were contemporaries, and they interacted together. And I think this had to do with the Harlem Renaissance when they were on stage together, Louis Gregory and Alain. Remember one thing about Mr. Gregory, he was a contemporary, and I know you know this, with W. Du Bois. And when Louis Gregory decided to become a Baha'i, the Niagara movement had just formed in 1905. And when he became a Baha'i, the reason why he moved away from the Niagara movement, because Louis Gregory said when he looked at the Baha'i faith, it solved everything. And it was already written how to do it. So that's why he moved away from the Niagara movement and went straight into the Baha'i faith. He became so adamant and became so active. And as a matter of fact, Du Bois's wife became a Baha'i as a result of Mr. Gregory becoming a Baha'i. So he had a great influence, and he had this countenance that would affect people. When people saw him, even in the dark, they said they would see this light coming from his face. And that's why I made the reference to him not being affected by people seeing that spirit. He didn't let it impede or give him any ego. He became as detached, and he died to the world. And that's why I think the reference of pure as gold was made about him by Sheikh Abdul Baha that I read in my talk. But I'll check that for you. I know I read it the other day, and I didn't look at it closely because I had so much information. But I'll send that to you as soon as I get off this call.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. And just for people maybe not familiar, Alain Locke, I just typed his name, was a philosopher, a writer, and sort of one of the patrons of the Harlem Renaissance. So a really important figure in early 20th century.
First African Rhodes Scholar.
Yeah. Maybe if there's no last questions, there's a couple people who just wanted to say a few words to comment, including Margaret. and Demet. And then we'll sort of say goodnight. So, Margaret?
Thank you, Elijah. I just want to say that I was a spinning instructor in the gym, and I have, and Sandra Brett's on the call too, and I have known Al through that spin class for about 12 years. And I learned from him about the Baha'i faith, and he lives it, he breathes it, he walks it, and as well as talking it. And I think that what I've learned from as a spiritual leader for me is that the tenets and the beliefs of oneness and unity, the time is now. It's not 12 months from now. It is now. And I just thank you for what you've shared tonight. And I would invite people, what is the name of the little alley where the Baha'i house?
Desporters Court.
Pardon me?
Desporters Court.
Right off of, is it Warren?
Yeah, number 2, Desporters Court.
Yeah, to go by there. I mean, I feel like this country has got so much in crisis, and I just feel like what Al has taught me could help all of us to see something bigger than our individual sets of beliefs. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
And Demet?
Yes. So Al, you may not remember me, but I worked at MUSC,
I
and
know
my
you.
brother is, yeah, Abe Jenkins.
I know.
And I worked with your wife,
Yeah.
your ex-wife, your wife at the time, Deborah.
Yes.
And that's how I got introduced to the Baha'i Faith through the two
Yes.
of you.
Yes.
And I was a social worker at the time. And then 20 years later, when I go off to seminary and I'm in ministry, never learned anything. No one ever talked about the Baha'i faith. But it was because of the two of you that I had an understanding of it and I had a respect for it. And so when I was able to encounter patients in the hospital when I worked as a chaplain, I was able to walk in there with knowing some traditions and how to honor and respect the patient and their family of that faith. So I just always wanted to say thank you just for sharing. And I agree with Margaret that you both were very committed to the tradition, and you walked it. You walked it. I saw it every day. And that's what appealed to me. And that's what made me want to learn more about it. So I just wanted to offer that gratitude. And thanks for just sharing about the tradition.
Thank you so much, and tell Abe I said hi.
Yes.
All right, well, it is 8:01, so we're mindful of the time. So we're gonna thank our speaker one more time. Maybe I'll unmute everyone just so we can get kind of an actual round of applause. Thank you so much.
Yay.
For all the questions and the comments. I felt like we're just with a group of friends here,
Well done, Al.
learning and sharing.
Thank you,
And just a
Al.
reminder
This
before you
is
all go off.
Thank you. Thank
Excellent
you.
job,
Dad.
Looks like you're surrounded by friends and family, which is so wonderful. And just a quick reminder, our 8th and final talk in this series on African American religious diversity is 2 weeks from tonight. You're all welcome to join us. You're already registered. It's on African American faith and millennials. So we're having a very young speaker talking about kind of changing patterns of faith among young African Americans. So that'll be our big finale. Please do join us. Good night, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you, Elijah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you,
All
everyone.
right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Al.
Bye-bye. Bye, Jackie. Hey.
We're gone.